My Gavanan Melonin, and well met indeed. I am Arachir Galadirthan, the head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and here we are again today to talk about aspects of the lore. And today, of course, as long anticipated, is a combination of Legolas and Gimli, as we continue talking about the various members of the Fellowship of the Ring. So before we dive in, usual disclaimers, any of the images shown in this video, none of them are created by me. If anyone takes umbrage with the picture in the video, then do contact me and we can sort that out. In addition, there are hardly any images on show throughout the length of this little video, and it is, as always, intended something as a podcast rather than as something you actually sit and watch. But if you wish to have it on, obviously, and you wish to watch it, be my guest. But by all means, do something else while you listen. So we are going to talk about Legolas and Gimli, and we'll do them in that order. So first up is, of course, Legolas. And we can talk about his name, because it is, of course, Sindarin. Now, Legolas is a kind of mutated or changed version of the pure Sindarin word Legolas, as shown there underneath his name. Or Legolas, sorry, not Le. It's Legolas. And that comes from Lig, which is a very old version of green in Sindarin, and Golas, which is a collection of leaves, like almost foliage more than leaf. These two words are quite rare in Sindarin and not seen too many other places, and it'd be more common in, as written at the bottom there, modern Sindarin, for his name to be Las Gallen, not Legolas. And this is partially because in Sindarin, when you're creating words, if you will, Greenleaf, green is describing the leaf in this case, I would submit. And when writing Sindarin in that way, it's often common to write it as the Latin languages do, in that it would be leaf green. So Las Gallen is leaf green, and thus Callan, as seen underneath, is changed to become Gallen to make it Las Gallen. And indeed, no, I'm thinking of something else. Whereas Legolas is literally green leaf, so it's just an interesting little oddity his whole name is an oddity. He is known to be called Legolas Greenleaf, so quite literally the two words together, but it's not his surname, and it's also not an epithet. It is literally just a translation of his name, and for some reason it just flows nicely. So a couple of times by Gandalf and by Galadriel, he is called Legolas Greenleaf, but as I say, it's not his real name, it's just a translation. So on to the man himself. We do not know who his mother is. We don't know when he was born. We don't know where he was born. And he first appears in our narrative at the arrival of the hobbits to Imladris. He is not present in the Hobbit book, if you are wondering. He could well be present in the Hobbit book because it takes place so soon before the Third Age, and so it's not a stretch that he's in the film. But he is not in the book. Thranduil isn't even named in the Hobbit book, so Legolas certainly isn't. It could be suggested, though, that he is at least 500 years old from a quote that he says regarding outside of Edoras. And he says the following. He says, 500 times have the red leaves fallen in Mirkwood in my home since then, said Legolas, and but a little while does that seem to us. Which, of course, suggests that he was alive for those 500 times the red leaves have fallen. And the addition at the end with "and but a little while does that seem to us," it could be read either way, doesn't it? Because he's talking about elves as a whole, not necessarily just himself. But of course it is therefore maybe suggested he's at least 500, but who knows? We just have no idea. You wouldn't even want to guess. But of course, we don't know, as I say, who his mother is. We don't know if his mother was maybe Sylvan. Obviously his father is a Sindar, Thranduil. But his mother may have been Sylvan. Thranduil might have taken a mother from the Nandor, the Wood Elves, the Sylvan Elves of Mirkwood that the Sindar came to rule. But again, all hypothesis, all theory, no even evidential backing for that. I'm merely just saying what could be, but we just don't know. So him coming to Imladris is because he has come to tell them that Gollum has escaped the cells, or the jail of Mirkwood. And this is partly through possible collusion with the orcs. There might be a suggestion Gollum is working with the orcs, but also partly due to just elven sympathy for Gollum and their really lackadaisical approach to guarding prisoners. Gollum escapes because they let him go outside, and then they get ambushed by orcs, and he escapes in the following melee. And that's why there's a suggestion maybe he arranges it, and possibly just because he gets lucky and escapes, and also because they take him outside. I mean, just leave him in his cell, and he's never going anywhere. But anyway, that's why Legolas comes to Imladris, and he gets swept up in, of course, the company as they journey with the Fellowship of the Ring. Throughout his time in the books, because he's only really present, of course, in the main narrative of the War of the Ring, which is the centre point of the Lord of the Rings trilogy or sexology. He's characterised by a kind of youthful spirit and a cheerfulness, a happiness, if you will. He's very carefree and happy-go-lucky, save for the various times that he drops rather ominous lines. But he is just a very youthful member of the company. So the bulk of this lore video, and indeed talking about Legolas and Gimli, of course concerns the War of the Ring. Many of you have... It's an absolutely done-to-death topic, so I'm not going to go into absolute mega detail. This is just a really brief narrative of the main events that revolve around Legolas, or the main things about him. So the first thing that we note about Legolas that sets him apart from his counterparts is when the company is crossing Caratharas, and they're all trudging and fighting through the snow. One of the key points about Legolas is that he, in fact, walks on top of it. And he even makes a joke to Boromir about this. Or Boromir makes a cutting remark to him because, of course, they're trudging through the snow. They're literally carving a path through the snow with their bodies. And Legolas just walks on top of it, around, up and down by the sides of them. And that's one of the things to note. And, of course, this is representative of elven litheness and their just general agility. And indeed, a elven characteristic that they are so light as to be able to walk on snow. He's also noted for having exceptional eyesight, again a trait shared with other elves, in fact almost all elves. And so he is frequently used as a watchman for the company, and he takes that position at the back, interestingly, quite a lot. Where he can see afar for the rest of them, rather than at the front. But then I suppose when you can see miles, it's better to go at the back and give warning to those at the front than it is to go at the front. I don't know. Anyway, he goes at the back a lot. The image on screen there is the next point. Legolas actually kills, and this isn't shown in the film, but it's possibly represented through his killing of the Mumakil in the third film. But Legolas actually kills a fell beast in darkness with a single arrow. He does this at a place called Sarn Gibir, which is just before the falls of Rauros, and obviously this breaking of the Fellowship and the fall of Boromir. Now, they're ambushed by orcs as they come upon the Sarn Gibir, and in the fray is a Nazgul riding a fell beast. And Legolas drops it. And this all takes place about midnight, just after midnight. And he kills it with a single arrow, which is an incredible feat. And the company laud him for this for a great time. The company, of course, then continues and journeys on, and much then happens as it does, as we all know. And the next note, that something that I feel is missed from the film, which is a key part to Legolas' story, is a warning that Galadriel gives him through Gandalf the White. So when the three hunters come upon Gandalf the White in Fangorn Forest, Gandalf comes with a message from Galadriel that speaks thus: Legolas, Greenleaf, long under tree, enjoy thou hast lived, beware of the sea. If thou hearest the cry of the gull on the shore, thy heart shall then rest in the forest no more. Which, of course, is foretelling that if he should come to the sea, he will then have a yearning for the sea. But a lot of elves do have a yearning for the sea. It's a characteristic of many elves, that they long for the sea, and Legolas doesn't have it yet, but he will should he come to the sea himself. The next point is that in the Paths of the Dead, Legolas is notably one of the few companions who is not afraid to go go through the doors of the dead. Along with Elladan and Elrohir, he shows bravery and just a sheer willingness almost. Whereas other characters, other members of the Grey Company, and indeed Gimli, show hesitation to enter the doors of the dead, but Legolas ploughs on through. But of course, after they come through the Paths of the Dead, they come eventually to the city of Pelagir, just north of the mouth of the Anduin. And this is where Galadriel's warning comes to fruition. For Legolas hears the cry of the gulls, and he stands on the edge of the sea, looking out to sea for a long time, as his mind is churning over what Galadriel has said, and the yearning for the sea starts to take hold within him. Then, of course, the War of the Ring comes to a conclusion. Legolas takes part in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and he goes with Aragorn to the Morannon, and he is then a member of the Coronation, of course. And then after the War of the Ring, owing to a promise he makes to Gimli, or they make to each other, he visits Aglarond, which is the name of the cave system behind Helm's Deep, all better known as the Glittering Caves, for they journey there together. And for this, Gimli then accompanies Legolas to Fangorn Forest, and the two journey for a time together in the start of the Fourth Age. After this, he returns home, and then he comes back to Ithilien with a small company of elves, and they seek to heal the land and make it once more green and fair. Depending on what kind of thing you read, and I suppose it's everybody's take on it, some suggest that actually an elven colony is established in Ithilien, whereas others suggest that merely they go as a kind of to assist in the regrowth of the land because it's been burnt and blackened and charred by Sauron and his corruption. I would suggest that it's the latter, really, and that it's not an elven fully fledged colony. They're not building a city or a town or anything. They just go there and they heal it and they regrow Ithilien, and then they depart. And of course, Legolas then comes out of the story. He doesn't die, but he leaves Middle-earth and he sails west to Aman, which takes place in the 120th year of the Fourth Age, shortly after Aragorn dies. But of course, he does not go alone. Very noticeable. In fact, almost their whole story is basically just showing that elves and dwarves can be friends. But of course, he goes with Gimli, son of Glóin. Now, I told you there wasn't much to say in this episode, because that's Legolas already covered, I'm afraid. Gimli, of course, is a dwarf. But very much like Legolas, we do not know who his mother is. But we do have other details about him, but first we'll start with his name. There are two suggestions for where Gimli comes from. Number one is that Tolkien himself writes in a draft letter to one of his interested fans that Gimli is taken from an Old Norse word gim, which is meant to mean fire. However, it is also suggested and also noted that in the Prose Edda and in the Voluspa, or I don't know how to say that in Old Norse, but in those two works of fiction, Gimli is a character. His name appears 3 times in the Prose Edda, and it appears once in the Voluspa. And given that almost every dwarf in Middle-earth's name is taken from Old Norse, it's likely that's possibly it. But then, of course, Tolkien writes himself that it's taken from Gim, meaning fire. But that's not to suggest that Gimli from the Prose Edda and the Voluspa, his name may be from Gim, so it could be the same root, if that makes sense. But anyway, it's not a Middle-earth word. Khuzdul, of course, is the dwarven language, and all dwarves have their own name in Khuzdul, but they are unknown to any others. They don't speak Khuzdul around anyone else, and there are very few Khuzdul words that we know, like Khazad-dûm is obviously one, and the names of the 3 peaks above Moria, which I don't know off the top of my head. Zirag-Zagil, I can't remember the other 2. Anyway, so his name comes from Old Norse in our world, not in Middle-earth, unlike Legolas. And as I say, we don't know who his mother was, but we do know that he was born in the Blue Mountains in the year 2879 of the Third Age. Remember, the War of the Ring takes place in 3019, and he was born in 2879. So about 140-ish years before the War of the Ring. And he's born, as I say, in the Blue Mountains, whilst the Longbeards, the clan of Durin, whilst they are in exile from Erebor, owing to Smaug and his destruction of their homeland. Gimli is actually a descendant of Durin the Deathless himself. He is a descendant of the royal line, given that his great-great-great-grandfather was King Nain II. And so he is one of the royals, which is always nice. He did actually try to join the quest for Erebor, which is of course the main feature of the Hobbit book, but he was only 62 years old at the time, and this is deemed too young for a dwarf, so he is not allowed to go. And of course, Glóin goes in his place. Glóin, say it how you will. I believe it's Glóin. If it were Glóin, there would be probably a diaresis above the O, but that doesn't really appear in Dwarven. Anyway, that's a different character. So the reason that he and Glóin have come to Imladris is because of a messenger of Sauron. So just shortly before the Council of Elrond, about a year before, give or take, a messenger comes to Erebor, and it's suggested that it might be a Nazgul, but it's never concretely said. But and he comes to the dwarves with a very simple message from Lord Sauron. And he says that we are willing to give you back 3 dwarven rings that we have in our possession, and we will allow you to live in Moria for the rest of your days, and all we want in return is just any information that you can give us about a Bilbo Baggins, hobbits in general and where they might live, and as well a tiny little ring, a nothing ring, an insignificant ring that you may have come across. And that's all they ask for. 3 times the messenger comes to Erebor, and 3 times he is given no answer, and thus, of course, refused. They don't agree. And he's sent on his way through non-action. But Gimli and Glóin have come to Imladris to discuss and to tell the other 3 peoples of this event as a kind of heed, a warning. So that is why he is there. And then, of course, he joins the company, the Fellowship of the Ring. Gimli is marked throughout his time in the Fellowship of the Ring as being very grim and very serious. He doesn't laugh very often at all. And he's just a bit... he's very dwarven. He is a very dwarven dwarf. If he believes in something or he wishes to defend something, he will defend it even against people who aren't really his enemy. This is shown, for example, in how he defends Galadriel fiercely when she is mocked by both Éomer and by Wormtongue. And in Moria, he has a kind of burning vengeance within him. And he often has to be dragged away from fighting orcs and goblins where he can. He's just a very stereotypical dwarf, really. Or a very stereotypical Middle-earth dwarf. And that's the general idea of him throughout the passage. Gimli is actually noted as having one of possibly the most famous Lord of the Ring quotes. I mean, everybody likes "Not all those who wander are lost," but an often overlooked yet still actually very well known quote is "Faithless is he who says farewell when the road darkens," and Gimli is the person who says that at the Council of Elrond. So there you go, that's where that quote comes from, if you've heard it before but didn't know where it came from. Throughout the time in Moria, Gimli actually assists Gandalf in venturing through and often provides important information to assist on their journey, even though he has never been there before. So it could well be that he's helping Gandalf really in that Gimli would understand the general layout, maybe what rooms would attach to other rooms, what certain architecture might mean, and so he just kind of assists as he can. And he leads the Fellowship over the bridge when Gandalf stays behind. It isn't Aragorn that leads them, it is Gimli that leads them to the East Gate when Gandalf holds off the Balrog. In Lothlórien is where he first kind of softens as a character, as he falls, really it can't be said any other way, that he falls in love with Galadriel, or he's enamoured by her. He thinks she is beautiful and fair beyond words, and he becomes besotted almost with her. Not in a love romantic way, but in just a way that you can cherish something so utterly that you're willing to die for it. And here his friendship with Legolas really starts to take fruit, and that it blossoms from Lothlórien onward. So up until Lothlórien, they actually do bicker at various times, and there is an animosity between them. But after Lothlórien, their friendship only grows, and of course, in the end, they sail away together, firming up their bond. His gift from Galadriel is, as you have seen, is 3 locks of her hair, which is mentioned in the film. That is correct, and it gives him the unofficial name of Lockbearer. It's one of his few other titles, which is quite interesting. At the Battle of the Hornburg, which is where the image on the screen at the moment comes from, Gimli saves Éomer's life, and the two of them actually also go from not really liking each other to having a very strong bond in the end, which is quite a nice one to see. And when Saruman's fire breaks the walls, Gimli is the first into the breach. He is a real fighter, he is a proper little warrior, and he manages to save quite a few of the retreating Rohirrim, and he is of the group that is beaten back into the Glittering Caves, for in truth, the Hornburg itself doesn't go anywhere. There is no escape passage from the Hornburg, and the caves don't exit out from behind the fortress. They are down below, behind the Deeping Wall. So you've got the fortress on the hill on the left, if you're looking from behind it, the wall covering in front, and behind the wall is like just a mustering area, and the entrance to the caves is down there. And he is of the group that gets beaten back into the caves. But he is then one of the first who breaches out of the caves along with Éomer when the time comes. So again, fulfilling the image of a true warrior. It is his time in the caves here when he is cowering and well, not cowering, when he is kind of hoping and praying for his life, that he falls in love with the caves, and this is where he gets the desire to return. As I already mentioned on the Legolas side, the next major event really for Gimli is at the Doors of the Dead. Gimli is reluctant to go in, and only really goes in for fear of the pride hit he might take if an elf go underground where he would not. So again, that line in the movie is another one that's in the book, really, not word for word per se, but it's in there. And he goes underground for fear that if an elf go and he doesn't, he'd never live it down. But he shows fear where Legolas didn't. So then again, like Legolas, he's present at the Pelennor Fields. He helps the army of the dead kill the Corsairs, and then he sails on the black ships to the Harlond. Not to be confused with Harlond in Lindon. This is Harlond in near Minas Tirith, which is the southern port of Minas Tirith. And he disembarks and fights the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. He goes on to the Morannon and he fights there. And it is noted that it's love for Aragorn that he journeys with Aragorn to the Paths of the Dead. He does have the option, as with the rest of them, to ride with Theoden as opposed to riding with Aragorn. And he chooses, of course, to ride with Aragorn. But after the War of the Ring, he and Legolas, as I say, they go to the Glittering Caves and they go to Fangorn Forest. And Gimli eventually returns to the Glittering Caves with a contingent of dwarves. And much like Legolas heals Ithilien, Gimli heals the stone woes of the land. He becomes the Lord of the Glittering Caves, and it's assumed he therefore helps rebuild the Hornburg. And he rebuilds the Gate of Minas Tirith out of mithril and steel. And he is known to accomplish many great works in the lands of Rohan and Gondor in the Fourth Age. And eventually he too sails west. And he goes with Legolas. Now this is a very interesting feature because of course only elves can live in Valinor and even anywhere in Aman, Tolaresia, Valinor. And he goes out of his love for Legolas, their love for each other, and this is a platonic friendship love, save what some of the images on the internet will have you believe. And it's very, very interesting that he is allowed to go. And Tolkien writes thus on the subject. Now, unfortunately, I did not get an image of this for the screen, so I haven't written it on the screen if you wish to read it. But Tolkien writes thus: we have heard tell that Legolas took Gimli, Glóin's son, with him because of their great friendship, greater than any that has been between elf and dwarf. And if this is true, then it is strange indeed that a dwarf should be willing to leave Middle-earth for any love, or that the Eldar should receive him, or that the Lords of the West should permit it. But it is said that Gimli went also out of a desire to see again the beauty of Galadriel, and it may be that she, being mighty among the Eldar, obtained this grace for him. More cannot be said of this matter. So, it's twofold really. He may be able to reside in Valinor because Galadriel speaks so fondly of him, speaks so highly of him. And it may just be that they kind of softened and they were like, what's one dwarf? Come on then, you're not going to live forever anyway, so live out your days here with us, friend. It's just unknown. But of course it does then mean that we do not know when Gimli dies, or indeed how old he was when he went. As I've already mentioned, he's about 140 at the time of the War of the Ring. Circa 140. Dwarves are known to live to about 500. So he could have another 300 years on him, 500 years on him. In Valinor, with the beauty and the joy of life that is there, people, it's said, live even longer. He may well live to 1,000, who knows. But of course, Legolas will live forever, and Gimli will not. And just a minor point, not related to Gimli as a whole, but like men, I certainly have not read, and if anybody does know, I would welcome the information. The souls of dwarves, I don't know what happens. I assume they would return to Aule in some form. Maybe they turn to stone. I don't know. But men, of course, have the gift of mortality, and elves live forever. And dwarves are somewhere in the middle. They, of course, die, but because they were created by Aule and given life by Ilúvatar, I wonder if they share the gift of men in terms of what actually happens to their souls, or if their souls just kind of return to Aule in his totality. It's unknown. So what happens when Gimli dies is totally unknown. But that is it. A much shorter lore video than usual because there is so little that we know about Legolas and Gimli. And without just recanting the entire plotline of the War of the Ring, you just can't really touch on what happens with them that much. So I do hope you've enjoyed it, though. I hope you've gained a little bit of information, and this, of course, sets the stage for whoever we cover next. I don't know who it will be. Maybe Boromir. I'm probably feeling Boromir, because the Hobbit ones will be a lot longer, because there's so much to talk about hobbits. But so maybe Boromir, we'll see. But for now, and until we speak again, dear friends, Nevair na den perimad melunin, Caer Arauf, and farewell.